Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our small corner of the world, a place where 1,000 stories are shared. My mother-in-law pushed me down a well. No, you didn't mishear. It was with the same wrinkled, bony hands that I used to massage with warming oil every night when she complained of arthritis. It was the same woman with a gentle smile, whom all the neighbors praised as kind-hearted and virtuous, who used all her strength to shove me backward into the mouth of the abandoned, dry well at the far end of the garden. The moment my back lost its support, the air was sucked from my lungs. I only had time to see the cold, soulless look in her eyes, a look without a flicker of hesitation, without a shred of humanity. Then, my body was in freefall through the darkness. I felt my back slam against the damp, cold stone wall of the well before a skull-splitting pain erupted from the back of my head, and everything went silent. To understand why she would commit such a monstrous act, perhaps we need to go back a little, back to the days when I was still naive enough to believe I was living with a decent family, no matter how suffocating life became. My name is Grace Miller, and I'm 28 years old. I married into the Thompson family 5 years ago. It wasn't a long time, but it was enough to erode all the innocence and rosy dreams of marriage a young woman could have. My husband, Ethan, was the kind of man any woman would dream of at first glance. He was tall, handsome, spoke with a smooth, cultured charm, and was the vice president of sales at a major import-export firm. He was the golden boy in everyone's eyes, the pride of his entire family. But only I, his wife, knew that behind that perfect facade was a terrifying weakness. Every decision in our home, from something as small as repainting a wall to something as large as a real estate investment, had to go through one person, my mother-in-law, Eleanor Thompson. Eleanor, to the outside world, was the epitome of a classic American matriarch. Widowed young, she had single-handedly raised 2 sons while building a formidable construction materials empire, Thompson & Sons Construction. She always appeared poised and spoke in a soft, gentle voice, a smile perpetually on her lips. Anyone who met her would remark on how blessed the Thompsons were to have such a capable and kind woman at the helm. But to me, that smile was more frightening than a frown. Behind it was a suffocating control, an invisible pressure that seeped into every corner of my life, strangling me day by day. 5 years of being a Thompson daughter-in-law was 5 years of living like a ghost in my own home. I had to be up by 5:30 a.m. to prepare breakfast for the family, a breakfast that could never be simple. It had to be a full spread, with options catered to Eleanor's specific, ever-changing tastes. Then I'd rush off to my job at a small accounting firm, only to race back home and dive into the kitchen like a moth to a flame, preparing dinner for a family of 5. At the dinner table, Eleanor mandated that everyone be present, without exception, and that's when my wifely training would begin. "Grace, the salmon is a bit dry tonight. You know I prefer it with more of a glaze," she'd say, her voice still gentle, but her eyes sharp as they scanned my face. A woman's touch in the kitchen should be delicate, the seasoning precise. Your husband comes home exhausted from work. How can he handle big business if he can't even enjoy a proper meal? I could only bow my head and murmur, "Yes, Eleanor, I'll be more careful next time." I'd glance at my husband, hoping for a word of defense, even just a comforting nod. But Ethan would just take a bite of food, his eyes never leaving his plate, and utter his soul-crushing mantra, "Mom's right, honey. You should listen to her." On the days I came home late from an unexpected meeting at work, she would be waiting in the living room, not to keep my dinner warm, but to lecture me. "Do you see what time it is? A career is fine for a woman, but don't forget your duties as a wife and a future mother. If there's no one to manage the household, what does that say about this family?" I'd be exhausted, wanting nothing more than to collapse into bed, but I'd have to stand there and listen to her sermonize for nearly half an hour. One night, I was so overwhelmed that I broke down crying in bed with my husband. "I feel like I'm suffocating, Ethan. She scrutinizes every little thing I do. Nothing is ever good enough for her." Ethan just sighed, patting my back as if comforting a child. "Just try to be patient with her, Grace. She's had a hard life. She's just a perfectionist. She doesn't mean any harm. You're the wife of the eldest son. You should be prepared to make some sacrifices." That chorus of "be patient and make sacrifices" followed me for 5 years. I was patient. I made sacrifices. I tried to become the perfect daughter-in-law in her eyes. I gave up my promising, high-paying job in auditing, a job with real opportunities for advancement, to become a bookkeeper at a small company closer to home, just to have more time to care for the family. I learned to cook her favorite dishes and bought the expensive herbal teas she liked to drink. I remembered everyone's birthday, from my youngest brother-in-law to some distant cousin, but I doubt anyone in that house remembered mine. I did everything, hoping for just a little recognition, a little genuine family warmth, but all I received was indifference and increasingly unreasonable demands. My life drifted on in this state of quiet desperation until one fateful Saturday afternoon, Eleanor asked me to clean out my late father-in-law's old study. He had passed away nearly a decade ago. The room was at the end of the second-floor hallway, kept locked year-round, and covered in a layer of dust so thick you could write your name in it. She said she wanted to turn it into a family library, a quiet space for future grandchildren to study. I suspected nothing. I just put on a mask, grabbed some cleaning supplies, and got to work. The room was filled with old memorabilia, stacks of documents, and books that had yellowed with time. The smell of dampness and old paper was slightly overwhelming. As I was wiping down a mahogany bookshelf, I accidentally knocked over a stack of old law books. Faded papers scattered like dead butterflies. As I bent down to pick them up, my hand brushed against a black leather-bound ledger hidden deep behind a set of thick legal volumes. It wasn't a normal notebook. The cover was hard, with no title, only a small brass lock, rusted with age. Curious, I used a bobby pin to try and pick the lock. After a moment of fiddling, the lock clicked open. I didn't know it then, but the moment that lock sprang open, the door to a terrifying secret of the Thompson family had just begun to creak ajar. With trembling hands, I opened the first page. This was no diary or business record. The entire ledger was handwritten in blue ink, the script a strong, decisive male hand. But the contents sent a chill down my spine. It was an account book, detailing monetary transactions, not with standard accounting terms, but with strange codes and initials. For example, River Bridge Project -$5M to partner KL. Evergreen Construction Materials Contract -$8M, operational expenses for BH. What struck me most was the sheer size of these transactions, millions of dollars, and they were all noted as cash. Furthermore, I had never heard of companies like River Bridge or Evergreen in any of the Thompson Company's business reports. I turned page after page, a growing sense of dread creeping over me. The ledger recorded transactions from about 7 to 10 years ago, the exact period when the family's construction business was experiencing its most rapid growth. And the handwriting, I recognized that familiar script. It was Ethan's. Why would my husband need to record company transactions so secretly, so cryptically? Who were partners, KL and BH? And why were such enormous sums being moved in cash? 1,000 questions swirled in my head. I quickly stuffed the ledger into my apron pocket, my heart pounding. I pretended as if nothing had happened, continuing to clean the room until dusk. That night, I couldn't sleep a wink. I waited until Ethan was sound asleep before I crept out to the living room with the ledger. Under the dim yellow light, I began to cross-reference the information in the book with what I knew about the company's finances. As someone with a professional background in accounting and auditing, I quickly spotted the inconsistencies. The numbers in this ledger didn't match any tax return or financial statement I had ever seen. This was a massive, undeclared flow of money. This was dirty money. I sat frozen in the vast living room, clutching the cold leather book. I had accidentally stumbled into a labyrinth, a secret I was never meant to know. But it was too late. My curiosity and an auditor's instinct wouldn't let me stop. I knew I had to find the truth, no matter how terrifying it might be. But I could never have imagined that this very search for the truth would ignite my mother-in-law's murderous rage and push me to the brink of death at the bottom of that deep, dark well. What horrifying secret did that ledger hold, and how did it become my one-way ticket to hell? That entire night, I couldn't get a moment of sleep. The black leather ledger lay silent in my nightstand drawer, but I felt as if it were emitting a cold aura, an invisible weight pressing on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I lay next to Ethan, listening to his steady breathing, the man I had shared a bed with for 5 years. But now, looking at his familiar face in the dark, I felt a chilling sense of strangeness. The handwriting in that ledger was his, without a doubt. So who was the real him? The gentle, slightly weak-willed husband I knew, or a man orchestrating tens of millions of dollars in illicit cash flows? I lay awake like that, my mind a tangled mess of unanswerable questions. I knew I couldn't act foolishly. Confronting him with the ledger would be a fatal mistake. With Eleanor's cunning and ruthlessness, they would easily twist the truth, turning me from the discoverer of a secret into a slanderer, a paranoid wife trying to destroy the family. No, I couldn't let that happen. I had to investigate on my own, gather enough proof, and know exactly what I was up against. As a former auditor, I understood the critical importance of evidence. Around 3 a.m., certain that Ethan was in a deep sleep, I slipped out of bed. My heart was pounding so hard I was afraid he could hear it. I gently opened the drawer and took out the ledger. Under the faint glow of the nightlight, I used my phone to carefully photograph every single page. My hand trembled. With each click of the shutter, I held my breath and glanced back at the bed, terrified that the slightest sound would wake him. Over 100 pages, I captured every line, from the numbers and codes to the faded ink spots. After I finished, I checked the photos meticulously to ensure everything was clear. Then, I carefully returned the ledger to its original hiding place in his father's study, wiping away any fingerprints I might have left. I had to become invisible, to act as if nothing had happened, as if I had never set foot in that room. Back in bed, I curled up under the covers, but my body was still ice cold. I now possessed a copy of the secret, a dangerous copy. And I knew that from this night on, my life had turned down a different path, a road riddled with traps and deceit. The next morning, I woke up early as usual. I went down to the kitchen to prepare breakfast, the same familiar dishes Eleanor demanded. But I was no longer the submissive, oblivious Grace of yesterday, I observed. I listened to every little detail. When the family sat down to eat, I deliberately put on a tired expression. Eleanor immediately spoke up, her voice still soft but full of authority. "Grace, you don't look well. Did you have a sleepless night?" I looked up and forced a smile. "Oh, it's nothing, Eleanor. The weather's been changing. I've just had a little trouble sleeping." I glanced at my husband. He said nothing, just focused on his food. But I saw his fork pause in midair for a second. Just a second, but it was enough for me to know he had a guilty conscience. I decided to run my first test, to cast a small lure and see how they reacted. I pretended to scroll through my phone and then said casually, "Wow, the news is reporting another case of a real estate company using shell corporations for money laundering, defrauding people of hundreds of millions. It's just awful." The moment I finished speaking, the atmosphere at the table visibly tensed. I saw the piece of egg on Eleanor's fork fall back into her bowl. She quickly coughed a few times to cover her unease and immediately changed the subject. "Eat up, everyone. The food's getting cold. Grace, try the bacon today. It seems a bit undercooked." She was deliberately steering the conversation back to the kitchen, a familiar tactic to reassert her authority and cut off topics she didn't want to discuss. But Ethan's reaction was the real prize. He choked on his water, coughing violently. After he calmed down, he looked at me and frowned. "Are you that bored, reading that kind of trash first thing in the morning? It's just sensationalist nonsense, ruins the appetite." His tone was unusually irritable. It was clear my innocent comment had hit a nerve. They were scared, very scared. Breakfast ended in a tense silence. I knew I was on the right track. They didn't just have a secret. They were living in fear of it being exposed. After Ethan left for work, I didn't go straight to my office. I told Eleanor I needed to run some personal errands. I drove to a small coffee shop where I could be alone. I opened my phone and reviewed the pictures from the night before. Now, with time and a clear head, I began to analyze them like a case file. I typed the company names River Bridge and Evergreen into a search engine. The results were exactly as I predicted. Nothing. No information, no website, no tax ID, not a single trace online. They were just names. Shell corporations set up for shady transactions. I kept digging, focusing on the initials KL and BH. I racked my brain, trying to remember if Ethan had ever mentioned names that could fit. I opened his old work schedule on the Google Calendar we shared. I cross-referenced the dates. On a Wednesday 3 years ago, the ledger noted a transfer of $10M cash to KL. Ethan's calendar entry for that day read, "Business trip to Atlantic City, project scouting." I let out a bitter laugh. A business trip worth $10 million in cash. What a ridiculous coincidence. The doubts about my husband's fidelity that I had suppressed for years suddenly resurfaced with a vengeance. But I knew this wasn't the time to think about that. The problem at hand was far bigger than an affair. As I was lost in thought, my phone rang. It was Eleanor. "Grace, where have you been for so long? It's almost noon, and you haven't come home to make lunch yet?" Her voice was the same, controlling every minute of my day. "Yes, I'm on my way back now," I answered quickly, closing my laptop and packing my things. I realized that from this day forward, I wasn't just living under her control, but under her surveillance. She suspected me. That house had become a gilded cage, and I was the bird being watched at every moment. That evening, the atmosphere in the house grew even stranger. Eleanor no longer lectured me during dinner. Instead, she just kept staring at me with a probing, scrutinizing gaze, as if trying to find something unusual in my expression. "Your work seems stressful lately, dear," she asked, her voice sickly sweet. "You seem so quiet and lost in thought." I just smiled. "It's nothing, Eleanor. Just the usual year-end rush." Ethan's behavior was also strange. He no longer buried his head in his phone after dinner. He sat in the living room watching TV with me, occasionally asking innocuous questions. "Anything interesting happen at work today? Seen any of your old friends lately?" He was probing, trying to find out if I had been in contact with anyone, if I had heard anything from the outside. I felt like an actress in a complex play, having to weigh every word, every gesture, every look. I was exhausted, but I knew I couldn't make a single mistake. One small slip, and they would know. And then, I didn't know what would happen to me. That night, I was sitting at my computer in the bedroom, pretending to finish a work report, but actually trying to decipher more of the codes in the ledger. I was trying to find a connection between the transactions when the bedroom door suddenly opened. Ethan walked in, holding a glass of warm milk. I jumped, quickly hitting a key combination to switch my screen to a familiar Excel spreadsheet. My heart was about to leap out of my chest. "What are you doing up so late?" he asked, walking over and placing the glass on my desk. "Drink this to warm up, then get some sleep." I tried to keep my voice from trembling. "I'm just double-checking some figures for tomorrow's report." He stood behind me, glancing at the computer screen. His eyes lingered there for a few seconds. I held my breath, afraid he would notice something. "Just a bunch of headaches," he said, his voice feigning indifference. "All right, get some rest. Don't overwork yourself." With that, he turned and went back to bed. I sat frozen, waiting until I heard his steady breathing before I let out a sigh of relief. That was too close. I looked at the glass of warm milk, steam still rising from it, but all I felt was a bone-deep chill. Was this concern genuine, or just another act to lull me into a false sense of security? The invisible net around me seemed to be tightening. I could feel the danger getting very, very close. In the following days, the surveillance from my mother-in-law and the probing from my husband became more blatant. Eleanor would casually walk into my room without knocking, claiming she was looking for something. Ethan would loiter nearby whenever I was on my phone or computer, pretending to see what I was doing. This house had truly become a prison. I felt suffocated, stressed to the breaking point. I knew I couldn't let this go on forever. I had to find a decisive piece of evidence, something powerful enough to expose everything before they could make a move against me. I decided to focus on the last code, the one that appeared most frequently and with the largest sums of money, BH. I had a gut feeling this was the most important link in the entire chain. I searched my memory through every story Ethan or Eleanor had ever told. BH. What name could those initials stand for? One evening, while helping Eleanor sort through old family photo albums, I stumbled upon a black-and-white picture of my father-in-law with another man. They looked very close, with their arms around each other's shoulders, smiling warmly. "Who is this, Eleanor?" I asked, feigning curiosity. Eleanor glanced at the photo, a flicker of sadness crossing her face. "Oh, that's Benny Hogan. He was your father-in-law's best friend back in the day. They were like brothers. It's a shame he died so young, right before the company really took off. Benny Hogan, B.H." An electric jolt went through me. I kept my expression calm and asked, "Oh, I see. He looks so kind. What did he pass away from?" "A car accident," she said. "A terrible, tragic accident." She sighed and put the photo away. That night, sleep was impossible. Benny Hogan, my father-in-law's deceased best friend. Why were these shady transactions linked to a dead man? Something was terribly wrong here. I opened my laptop and typed Benny Hogan and Thompson into the search engine. A few results popped up, but none mentioned a car accident. Instead, an old newspaper article from 10 years ago made me freeze. The headline was stark: "Mob Boss Benny, the Bull Hogan apprehended by feds." Below it was a photo of the man from the album, but there was no kind smile. It was a cold, hard face staring into the camera as he was being led away in handcuffs. I read the article over and over, each word a hammer blow to my head. Benny Hogan didn't die in a car accident. He was a notorious mobster, the head of a syndicate involved in protection rackets, loan sharking, and other illegal activities. He had been arrested and sentenced to life in prison. The entire story Eleanor had told me was a lie constructed to cover up a horrifying connection. Thompson and Sons Construction, the empire Eleanor was so proud of building with her own 2 hands, was connected to an organized crime syndicate. The millions of dollars in that ledger weren't just for tax evasion, it was money laundering. I sat staring at the screen, a wave of disgust and terror washing over me. What kind of family had I married into? What kind of monsters had I been living with for 5 years? As I was about to close my laptop, I suddenly heard the sound of very soft footsteps in the hallway. They stopped right outside my bedroom door. My heart stopped. I quickly shut off the screen, scrambled into bed, and pulled the covers up, pretending to be fast asleep. The door opened slowly, without a sound. A shadow slipped into the room and stood by my bed for a long time. I didn't dare breathe, feeling a cold gaze fixed on me. Then I heard a soft rustling sound. The person was going through my handbag. A moment later, the shadow slipped out as quietly as it had entered, closing the door behind it. I lay motionless, drenched in a cold sweat. It wasn't until I was sure the intruder was long gone that I shakily sat up and turned on the small nightlight. I quickly checked my handbag. Everything was still there, my wallet, my phone. Nothing was missing. But I knew they weren't there to steal. They were there to search. To search for a black leather ledger, and perhaps they were also looking for a way to silence me, permanently. The dark figure that had silently left my room had taken with it all my sleep and what little peace of mind I had left. I sat huddled on the bed, my body shaking, not from the cold, but from a tangible fear that was closing in on me. They had started to act. They were no longer probing. They were actively searching. They knew something was threatening them, and they would stop at nothing to plug the leak, even if that leak was me. I couldn't stay in this house another night. Every corner, every little noise made me jump. I felt like I was living with a pack of wolves, and they were just waiting for the right moment to pounce. But where could I go? To my mother's house? I didn't want to drag her into this. She was older, her health wasn't good. I couldn't let her worry or face the retaliation of these people. I needed a safe place, somewhere they wouldn't think to look, a place where I could calmly reassess and prepare for a counterattack. I immediately thought of Chloe Davis, my best and only friend from college. Chloe was a sharp, brilliant lawyer, and most importantly, she was someone I could trust with my life. The next morning, I made up an excuse about a sudden 2-day business trip for work that required me to leave immediately. Eleanor looked at me with deep suspicion. What kind of business trip is so sudden? How come I didn't hear Ethan mention it? I kept my face placid. This is for my accounting department. It has nothing to do with Ethan's sales team. My director just assigned it last night. I barely had time to pack. I lied deliberately, knowing they wouldn't have time to verify it. She was still scowling at me but had no reason to stop me. Well, go on then. Get it over with and come back. Don't be dawdling around. I murmured a yes, and quickly packed a small suitcase with just a few changes of clothes and essentials. I didn't dare bring the real ledger. I had already hidden it in the safest place I knew, a place only I could find. I only brought my phone, which held all the photographed evidence. I took a cab straight to Chloe's law firm. The moment she saw my haggard face and the dark circles under my eyes, she pulled me into her private office and locked the door. "My God, Grace, what happened to you? You look like you've seen a ghost." I couldn't hold it in any longer. I threw my arms around her and burst into tears. All the tears of frustration and fear that I had suppressed for so long just poured out. Chloe just held me, rubbing my back, waiting for me to calm down. When I finally stopped crying, I took out my phone and showed her all the pictures of the ledger. I told her everything, finding the book, the strange behavior of my in-laws, the horrifying truth about the mob boss Benny Hogan, and the intruder in my room the night before. As Chloe listened, her expression grew more and more serious. When I finished, she sat in silence for a long moment, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Grace," she finally said, "you married into a crime family, not a normal one. This isn't a domestic issue anymore. Money laundering, ties to organized crime, these are incredibly serious federal offenses." She looked at me, her eyes full of concern. "Leaving that house was the smartest thing you could have done. You absolutely cannot go back there. You can stay at my place. It's completely secure." I nodded, feeling a wave of relief at having a friend by my side. "So what do we do now, Chloe? I'm so lost." "Stay calm," Chloe said, taking my hand. "First things first, we need to verify everything. I'll have my people run a complete background check on the Thompson Company, those shell corporations, and the connection to Benny Hogan. We need solid legal evidence, not just photos of a ledger with an unknown origin. Second," she continued, "you have to be extremely careful. If they're brazen enough to break into your room, there's no telling what else they'd do. From now on, limit your time outside, and be careful with all your communications." We spent the rest of the afternoon mapping out a detailed plan. With her sharp legal mind, Chloe laid out the next steps. She said that with this initial evidence, we could go to the police. But that would be very dangerous for me. The investigation would take time, and during that period, they would likely try to eliminate the only witness, me. The best approach, she argued, was to gather more irrefutable evidence that could take them down in a single blow. "But how can I gather more evidence if I can't go back there?" I asked worriedly. Chloe smiled, a confident glint in her eyes. "I have a way. Do you remember that one habit of Ethan's he could never shake?" I frowned, thinking, he loves to brag, especially when he's had a few drinks. "Exactly!" Chloe's eyes lit up. "We're going to set a trap. A party where he can drink to his heart's content and boast about his achievements, completely unaware that his every word is being recorded." The plan was set. Chloe would ask an old friend, a successful entrepreneur Ethan had always admired, to host a business dinner at a high-end restaurant with a private VIP room. Ethan would surely not refuse an opportunity to show off and network with the wealthy. And at that dinner, we would plant miniature recording devices. Once he was drunk and started talking, we would get the confession we needed. The plan sounded like something out of a movie, but in this situation, we had no other choice. For the next few days, I stayed at Chloe's apartment, barely stepping outside. Meanwhile, Chloe set the plan in motion. She contacted her entrepreneur friend, who agreed to help after hearing the story. Everything was proceeding as planned. I called home, still pretending to be on my business trip, keeping my tone normal to avoid suspicion. Ethan seemed to believe me. He even reminded me to buy a gift for his mother. Hearing his deceptively sweet voice over the phone just made me sick to my stomach. He had no idea that in just a few days, his own arrogance and boastfulness would be the very things that would dig a grave for his entire family. However, there was one thing neither Chloe nor I had anticipated. On the night of the dinner party, an unexpected guest appeared, someone who wasn't in the script. And this person's appearance nearly ruined everything, but in doing so, revealed a truth even more horrifying than money laundering. A truth directly related to the death of my father-in-law and the reason why Eleanor had become so cruel and ruthless. They weren't just hiding one crime, they were hiding layers upon layers of them. The horrifying truth about the connection between my husband's family and the mob boss Benny Hogan was like a nightmare from which I couldn't wake. I tried to reassure myself that maybe it was all just a coincidence, that maybe Eleanor was lying to cover up something less severe. But my intuition, the cold logic of the numbers in the ledger, all told me that I was on the verge of a terrible discovery. Fear seeped into every cell, waking me up in the middle of the night, my back drenched in sweat. I was scared not just for myself, but for the people I loved. If they dared to collude with criminals, to orchestrate such a systematic deception, there was nothing they wouldn't do to silence me. I knew I couldn't live in fear and silence forever. I had to do something. I had to confront them, to find the answers, even if those answers would completely shatter my marriage and put me in grave danger. I decided I couldn't wait for the dinner party Chloe was arranging. I needed to act now, while they were still off guard. I needed a conversation, a direct confrontation with the person pulling all the strings, my mother-in-law. I chose a Thursday afternoon when I knew Ethan and his brother would be at work, leaving just Eleanor and me at home. I wanted a conversation without outsiders, without the interference of my spineless husband. I wanted to face her, woman to woman. I chose the location, the backyard garden. There was an old stone bench under a bougainvillea trellis, a place that was quiet and secluded. More importantly, it was near the abandoned, dry well, its dark mouth like an eye constantly staring at the house. I don't know why I chose such a place. Perhaps subconsciously, I sensed some kind of omen. I brewed a pot of chamomile tea, her favorite, and brought it out to the garden. Eleanor was sitting there, holding a fashion magazine, but her eyes were gazing into the distance. Seeing me, she looked slightly surprised but maintained her calm facade. "You seem to have a lot of free time. Shouldn't you be thinking about dinner instead of having tea?" It was the same familiar, condescending tone. I set the teapot on the table and poured 2 cups. "Eleanor, I have something I need to ask you." I got straight to the point, my voice no longer submissive but laced with a strange new firmness. She frowned, putting down the magazine. "What is it that has you looking so serious?" I didn't answer right away. I took out my phone, opened the photo of the newspaper article about Benny Hogan's arrest, placed it on the table, and turned it towards her. "Do you recognize this man?" The moment she saw the picture, I clearly saw a flash of panic in her eyes. It was gone in an instant, but I had seen it. She blinked a few times, then let out a forced laugh. "Who is this?" "He looks familiar. Probably some actor in the paper." "Why are you interested in such things?" She was denying it. I knew she would. I calmly continued, "This is Benny Hogan, Dad's old friend. You told me he died in a car accident, but this article says he was arrested for being a mob boss and is serving a life sentence. Can you explain that to me?" This time, the smile vanished from her lips. She looked at me, her gaze no longer feigning kindness, but turning cold and sharp as a knife. "Where did you get this? Who told you about these things?" She hissed. "That's not important, Eleanor. What's important is why you lied to me. Why does our family company have multi-million-dollar cash transactions with a criminal like him?" The final mask had fallen. Eleanor was no longer acting. She shot up from her seat, her eyes blazing. You dare to investigate me? Who do you think you are to meddle in this family's affairs?" she screeched, pointing a finger at my face. "Yes, I lied. So what? You're just a daughter-in-law. You have no right to ask questions. This company, this empire, I built it with my own 2 hands. Who I do business with is my right. You have no place to judge." The venomous words poured from her mouth, a complete contradiction to the image of the perfect mother-in-law she had cultivated. I stood up as well, no longer afraid. "I am Ethan's wife, a member of this family. I have the right to know the truth. I have the right to know if the family I'm living with is clean. You're turning your son, turning this entire family, into accomplices to your illegal activities." "Accomplices?" She laughed, a wild, maniacal sound. "You are so naive, dear. You think Ethan doesn't know? You think he's some innocent saint? He knows everything. In fact, he was the one who carried out the transactions. Wasn't it his handwriting in that black ledger?" Her words were a sledgehammer blow to my head. "Ethan, he knew? He was the one doing it? So all the words of love, all the embraces, they were all lies. He had deceived me, made a fool out of me for 5 years. Tears welled in my eyes, but I forced them back. I couldn't be weak now. Why? Why would you do this? I screamed. Why drag me into this? Because you were stupid, she snarled, stepping closer, her eyes bloodshot. Because you had a clean record, a respectable job, you were the perfect cover, with a daughter-in-law who's an auditor. Who would ever suspect the company's books? But you disappointed me. You got too curious. You learned things you shouldn't have. She kept advancing, and I instinctively backed away. Behind me was the mouth of the dry well. What are you going to do? Are you going to the police? She asked, her voice dripping with menace. I won't let you ruin everything. All my hard work, my son's futures. I will not let someone like you destroy it all. Eleanor, you're insane! I panicked, trying to sidestep her and run, but it was too late. She lunged, grabbing my shoulders with the desperate strength of a cornered woman. I tried to struggle free, but her grip was unnaturally strong. Let go of me! I screamed, but she wouldn't. As we wrestled, my foot caught on a loose stone. I lost my balance and fell backward. The moment my back lost its support, the air was sucked from my lungs. I only had time to see the cold, soulless look in her eyes, a look without a flicker of hesitation, without a shred of humanity. Then, my body was in free fall through the darkness. I felt my back slam against the damp, mossy stone wall before a skull-splitting pain erupted from the back of my head, and everything went silent. I didn't even hear my own scream, only the thick darkness swallowing me whole. Even in that final moment, I couldn't believe that the person who had mercilessly pushed me into hell was the same person I had called mother for 5 years. A sharp pain in the back of my neck pulled me from the hazy fog of unconsciousness. I slowly opened my eyes, but all I could see was a thick, impenetrable blackness. The air was damp and cold, carrying the smell of wet earth, moss, and decay, which hit my nostrils and sent me into a fit of coughing. Where was I? I tried to sit up, but my entire body ached, especially my left ankle. A pain that shot straight to the bone made me cry out. I reached down to feel it. My ankle was dislocated and badly swollen. I tried to piece together my last memories before blacking out. The garden, the bougainvillea, the confrontation with Eleanor, and then the dark mouth of the well. I was at the bottom of the well. My own mother-in-law had pushed me down here to silence me. The brutal truth hit me, colder and crueler than the damp earth I was lying on. She thought I was dead. She had left me here, in this cold, deep hole, to slowly die of hunger, thirst, and my injuries. A feeling of utter despair and terror consumed me. I screamed, a hopeless cry into the void. "Help me! Is anyone there? Help!" But the only response was the echo of my own voice, bouncing off the stone walls before fading into silence. I knew no one would come. Up there, Eleanor was probably calmly preparing dinner, playing the role of a mother worried about her daughter-in-law who had suddenly run away from home. No one would find me here. I was going to die here. A silent, unjust death. I buried my face in my knees and sobbed. I cried for my wretched fate, for my parents back home who still thought their daughter was living a happy life. I cried for my own foolishness in blindly trusting a family of deceivers. But then, amidst my sobs, the image of my mother, the hard-working woman who had raised me on her own, appeared in my mind. I remembered what she told me before I got married. "Daughter, no matter what happens, you are never allowed to give up. You have to live with your head held high." No, I couldn't die here. I couldn't let those evil people get what they wanted. I couldn't let their crimes be buried with me in this well. I had to live. I had to live to expose their true faces, to get justice for myself. That thought was like a powerful gust of wind, fanning the flickering flame of survival within me. I wiped my tears and took a deep breath to calm myself. I began to survey my surroundings. By the faint light filtering down from the well's opening, I could vaguely make out that it was an old brick well, long abandoned. The walls were covered in slippery green moss. The bottom wasn't as deep as I had feared, maybe only 15 or 20 feet, but with a dislocated ankle, climbing out was impossible. The bottom was dry, just a layer of damp mud and decaying leaves. I dragged my injured leg, crawling around, hoping to find something that could help me. My hands fumbled in the dark, touching broken bricks, sharp shards of pottery, and the rubbish people had thrown down here over the years. I was about to give up, despair creeping back in. I leaned my back against the cold stone wall, feeling the hunger and pain racking my body. Maybe this dark place was my destiny after all. Just then, as I was leaning against the wall, I felt something unusual. The bricks where my back rested seemed slightly loose. Curious, I reached out and felt them. One brick. It wasn't set as firmly as the others. Using all my remaining strength, I tried to pry it out. The brick was heavy, but after a struggle, I finally managed to pull it from the wall. A puff of dry, stale air wafted out from the opening. I reached my hand into the hole. It was hollow. My heart pounded. I continued to pry at the surrounding bricks. They were also surprisingly loose, as if someone had intentionally built them that way. When I had removed 4 or 5 bricks, a dark cavity was revealed, just large enough for me to squeeze through. But what stunned me wasn't the cavity itself, but what lay deep inside it. In the dim light, I saw a rectangular object that looked like an old wooden chest. It was placed neatly inside the alcove, carefully concealed. Where did this chest come from? Why was it hidden in such a secret place? Forgetting the pain in my ankle, forgetting the gnawing hunger, I used both hands to pull the chest out. It was heavy, covered in dust and cobwebs. The chest was made of dark wood, carved with ancient patterns that had faded with time. On the lid was a large brass lock, oxidized to a greenish color. I had no key. I looked around, grabbed a broken brick, and with all my might, smashed it against the lock. The sound of metal on metal echoed dryly in the silence of the well. I struck it again and again. The pain from my ankle and my exhaustion almost made me pass out. But some invisible force urged me on. I had to continue. I had to know what was inside this chest. Finally, after countless blows, the old brass lock couldn't take any more. It broke open. Panting, I quickly lifted the lid. A heavy, earthy scent, the smell of time and long-buried secrets, wafted out. And the glittering light that reflected the faint glow from the well's opening made me hold my breath. Gold. Bars of solid gold were stacked neatly, gleaming with a rich, lustrous sheen. Beside them were pieces of jewelry made of jade and precious stones, things I had only ever seen in movies. This was a treasure, a real treasure. But amidst the glittering jewels, one object, though not shiny, captured all my attention. It was a scroll of aged, yellowed paper, carefully tied with a red silk thread. My hands trembling, I gently picked up the scroll and untied the thread. Inside were lines of elegant, cursive script, written with a brush pen, the strokes powerful and full of character. Though I couldn't read all of it, I recognized a few familiar words from the paleography classes my historian grandfather had made me take as a child. And at the very bottom, a bright red wax seal was stamped, bearing the image of a dragon and the name, the Thompson Family Trust. This was a founding charter from a Thompson ancestor. I didn't know then that this fragile scroll was more valuable than all the gold and jewels combined. It held not only the secrets of a dynasty, but also my fate, the fate of my husband's family, and the one and only key that would allow me to step out of the darkness, return from hell, and begin my revenge. The old wooden chest and the ancient scroll weren't just a glimmer of hope, they were a blinding light. A brilliant light at the very bottom of despair, signaling a rebirth and a spectacular overthrow that was about to begin. I sat on the cold floor of the well, surrounded by the glittering gold, but my entire focus was on the fragile scroll in my hands, the founding charter of the Thompson family patriarch. A strange feeling, both sacred and surreal, washed over me. I, a woman who had just been pushed to the depths of despair by her own in-laws, was now holding the secret, and perhaps the very destiny, of their entire dynasty. With trembling hands, I unrolled the charter. The ancient, elegant, cursive script appeared, fluid yet firm. Thankfully, the paleography skills my grandfather, an old-school historian, had diligently taught me as a child were now proving to be priceless. I began to carefully read, deciphering each word, each sentence. The more I read, the more astounded I became. The charter was penned by the third-generation patriarch of the Thompson family, a shrewd industrialist from the Gilded Age who had established the family's initial fortune. He wrote that during a time of great economic uncertainty, to preserve the family's assets and find a truly worthy heir, he had decided to hide the bulk of the family's wealth in a secret place. And that place was this very cavity at the bottom of the well. He believed that only a descendant who had faced true adversity, who had been pushed to the brink but still retained the will to survive and the wisdom to find this secret, would be worthy. And then I reached the most crucial part, the passage that made my heart stop. He wrote, "I, the founder of the Thompson Trust, do hereby decree that any person, be they blood relative or otherwise, who finds this chest and reads this charter shall, by that act, become the sole trustee of the entire remaining Thompson family estate, including all lands, properties, and enterprises I have left behind. Said person shall have full authority to manage, distribute, or reclaim assets from any unworthy or dishonorable descendants currently in possession. This charter holds supreme authority, and no member of the family may defy it. This is my command, and my challenge to posterity." I read that passage a dozen times, each word engraving itself onto my mind. Sole trustee of the entire estate, full authority to reclaim assets. Me? A daughter-in-law, an outsider, someone they had just tried to discard like trash, was now the one holding the fate of their entire dynasty. A smile, bitter yet triumphant, spread across my lips. How ironic. Eleanor, my mother-in-law, who constantly preached about family legacy and tradition, who had pushed me down here to protect the empire she thought was hers, had no idea that her own ancestor had ordained a completely different destiny. The patriarch didn't believe in bloodline. He believed in character and wisdom. And today, I, Grace Miller, was the one who had passed his test. But the joy and triumph quickly faded, replaced by a more practical question. How do I get out of here? Does this charter even have legal standing? And even if it does, how can I fight against a family as powerful and ruthless as the Thompsons? As if anticipating the concerns of his future heir, the patriarch had added another section at the end of the charter. This part was less grand and more cunningly practical. He wrote that to empower the finder of the charter, he had left two things. First was a signet ring bearing the family's dragon crest, hidden in a small box beneath the gold. This ring was the family's symbol of authority, more powerful than any signature. Second, and most importantly, he had provided a way out. I read carefully. From the alcove hiding this chest, go deeper, and you will find a secret tunnel, built by my forefathers in case of war. This tunnel leads to an old storehouse at the far end of the estate, near the river. I quickly turned back to the cavity and reached deep inside. Just as the patriarch had written, the space opened up further in the back. Gritting my teeth against the pain, I dragged my injured leg and crawled into the alcove. Inside was a small tunnel, just big enough for one person to crouch through. The air was damp and suffocating, but to me, it was more precious than the freshest air in the world. It was the path to life. I didn't leave immediately. I crawled back to the bottom of the well. I couldn't carry all this gold. I took only the smallest bar and hid it securely in my clothes. It would be my seed money to start the war. I carefully wrapped the charter and the signet ring in a piece of cloth torn from my dress and tucked it into my shirt. I looked back at the bottom of the well one last time, the place where I had experienced the ultimate despair and also the place where I was reborn. I whispered to myself, "Eleanor, you threw me down here to kill me, but you had no idea you were throwing me right into a treasure chest, handing me the most powerful weapon to use against you. Just you wait. I'll be back soon. Not as your submissive daughter-in-law, but as the master of everything you possess." I turned, and with the last of my strength, I crawled into the secret tunnel. Darkness enveloped me once again, but this time my heart was not filled with fear, but with a raging fire of vengeance. I didn't know how long the tunnel was. I only knew that at the end of it, a new life and a brutal battle were waiting for me. The greatest overthrow in the history of the Thompson family was about to begin. The tunnel was dark and narrow, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and centuries of neglect. I couldn't stand, only crawl forward on my hands and my one good leg. The pain from my dislocated ankle throbbed with every movement. I had to bite my lip to keep from crying out. Sweat soaked my back, mixing with the dirt caked on my body. I don't know how long I crawled, an hour, 2, maybe longer. Time seemed to stand still in the darkness. I clung to a single thought. I must survive. I must get out. My hatred for Eleanor and Ethan had transformed into a strange energy, helping me push through the pain and exhaustion. I would not allow myself to collapse, at least not until I made them pay. Finally, I felt a faint breeze. A sliver of dim light appeared ahead. Overjoyed, I summoned my last reserves of strength and crawled faster towards the light. The exit was a rotten wooden plank cleverly disguised under a pile of dry hay. I pushed against it with my shoulder. It creaked, and then collapsed. Daylight suddenly flooded in, forcing me to squint. As my eyes adjusted, I realized I was in an old, dilapidated storehouse, just as the charter had described. The smell of rot and old fertilizer filled the air. Around me were rusted farm tools and torn sacks. I had escaped. I had actually escaped that living grave. I collapsed onto the dirt floor, panting, my body screaming in protest. Tears streamed down my face again, but this time, they were tears of relief and freedom. I didn't dare stay long. I knew I had to get off this property as quickly as possible. I tore a strip of fabric from the hem of my ruined dress and tied it tightly around my injured ankle to stabilize it. I found a sturdy wooden stick to use as a crutch. Catching my reflection in a shard of a broken mirror, I felt a pang of sorrow. My hair was a tangled mess, my face streaked with mud, my clothes in tatters. I looked like a beggar. But in the eyes of that battered woman, there was a steely determination I had never possessed before. I crept along the wall, peeking through a crack in the door to survey the outside. The storehouse was in a secluded corner of the estate, hidden by overgrown bushes. I waited until I was sure no one was around before I limped out, sticking to the cover of the trees. I had to get to the main road, find a ride. Luckily, after a few hundred yards, I reached the dirt track that led to the highway. An old, beat-up delivery truck was chugging along. Without a second thought, I lunged out, waving my arms frantically. The truck screeched to a halt. The driver, a middle-aged man with a weary face, stuck his head out the window. "What are you doing? You want to get yourself killed? Sir, please, can you give me a ride? I missed my bus, and my ankle is injured," I pleaded. The driver looked at my pathetic state, hesitated, then nodded. "All right, get in. I'm heading to the next town." I scrambled into the cab, overcome with gratitude. Sitting on the cracked vinyl seat, I finally felt safe. I was out of the Thompsons' territory. During the ride, I made up a story about visiting relatives and getting robbed, losing all my money and ID. The kind driver didn't ask many questions. He even gave me a bottle of water and a sandwich. When we reached the town center, I thanked him profusely and got out near a marketplace. The first thing I needed was money. I found a small pawn shop tucked away in an alley. I took out the small gold bar and placed it on the counter. The owner eyed the gold, then eyed me, his expression full of suspicion. "Where'd you get this?" "It was part of my dowry," I lied without blinking. "I have a family emergency and need the cash." After testing it thoroughly and confirming it was real, he agreed to buy it. The money I received was enough to live comfortably for several months. With money in hand, my next stop was a small, clean motel. I needed a shower, new clothes, and most importantly, to properly care for my ankle. Then, I bought a cheap burner phone and a new SIM card. The first and only person I called was Chloe. "Hello?" Chloe's voice came through the line. "Chloe?" "It's me, Grace," I said, my voice choking up. "Grace! Oh my God, where are you? I've been calling you for days. Your family said you were on a business trip. Do you know what's happening back home?" "What is it?" I asked, startled. "Ethan reported you missing to the police. He's suggesting you ran off with another man. He even showed them some flirtatious texts from a strange number on your phone as evidence. They're trying to paint you as an unfaithful wife who just left to legitimize your disappearance." Rage boiled inside me. Those monsters. They didn't just want me dead. They wanted to destroy my reputation too. "Chloe, listen to me carefully," I said, taking a deep breath. I didn't run away. Eleanor pushed me down the well. I recounted the entire horrifying ordeal, the confrontation, the fall, finding the treasure chest, and the charter. Chloe was stunned into silence on the other end. When I finished, she finally spoke, her voice filled with disbelief and fury. "I can't believe it. Grace, you've been through too much." "I'm okay." "I got out," I said, my voice now hard as steel. "Chloe, I need your help. I need you to verify the legality of this charter, and I need you to help me plan my revenge." "You can count on me." Chloe's voice was resolute. "We won't just get you justice, Grace. We will make them pay for every single crime they've committed. For now, stay put. Send me pictures of the charter and the ring. Do not reveal your location to anyone. Leave the rest to me." After hanging up, I sat in the small motel room, my mind racing. My war was no longer a solo mission. I had an ally, a brilliant legal mind by my side. The plan for revenge began to take shape, clear and cold. They thought I was dead, buried at the bottom of a well along with the truth. But they were wrong. I had returned from hell, armed with an ancestor's will and a fury that could not be quenched. The storm was about to break. In the following days, I lived in complete seclusion in the small-town motel room. To my in-laws and the rest of the world, Grace Miller was a name from the past, an adulterous wife who had vanished without a trace. They were likely celebrating, gloating over having so perfectly eliminated the thorn in their side. They had no idea that my ghost was still very much present, silently watching and weaving an invisible net. I spent most of my time resting and healing. My ankle was much better after I found a local clinic to have it reset. I started eating properly, regaining my strength. I knew the fight ahead would be long and arduous. I needed a healthy body and a clear mind. Every day, Chloe and I communicated through a secure messaging app. She kept me updated. As we suspected, the Thompsons made no real effort to find me. They just kept up the act of the grieving, worried family for the neighbors and the police. Ethan would occasionally post sentimental drivel on social media. "Where are you, honey? Come home. We're all waiting for you," accompanied by our happy wedding photos. His hypocrisy was nauseating. But Chloe said to let him play his part. The deeper he got into his role, the harder he would fall. Meanwhile, Chloe was working tirelessly. She had sent the photos of the charter and the signet ring to an expert in historical documents and artifacts. The preliminary results confirmed they were authentic, dating back over a century. Legally, Chloe explained, this was an incredibly rare case. A foundational trust document with such a provision, if proven authentic in court, would carry immense legal weight, enough to overturn all current ownership deeds. "But the key is proving it's authentic in court," I pointed out. "We need more corroborating evidence," Chloe replied. "I've already started researching the Thompson family history, looking for old genealogical records. It's time-consuming, but not impossible. I'm also consulting with a few historians and legal scholars. You just focus on getting better." Beyond the legal front, Chloe helped me with something crucial. She secretly opened a new bank account for me under a completely different name. Then, she helped me discreetly and safely sell off a small portion of the gold I had. I now had a substantial financial reserve, enough to begin executing my own plans. I couldn't just sit and wait. I started by completely changing my appearance. I cut off the long hair I'd had for years, opting for a short, stylish pixie cut. I dyed it a light chestnut brown, started wearing non-prescription glasses, and completely changed my style of dress. The woman who once wore conservative business attire was replaced by someone in more modern, edgier clothes. Looking in the mirror, I sometimes didn't recognize myself. The old Grace, the meek and submissive daughter-in-law, had truly died at the bottom of that well. The woman in the mirror now was someone else entirely, with cold, sharp eyes and a single-minded goal: revenge. With a new identity, I began my own investigation. I couldn't show my face, but I had money. I hired a team of professional private investigators Chloe recommended. My instructions were clear. I wanted to know everything about Thompson & Sons Construction and all their business activities, especially those in the shadows. I provided them with the initial information from the Black Ledger, the shell company names, the coded initials. The P.I.S. got to work, and within a week, Their first report confirmed my most horrific suspicions. The Thompson Company wasn't just laundering money for Benny Hogan. After he went to prison, Eleanor and Ethan had taken over part of his criminal enterprise. They had turned the company into a front for loan sharking and violent debt collection. The shell corporations were used to legitimize the enormous profits from these illegal activities. The report even included photos and videos of my brother-in-law, the youngest son I always thought was a quiet, harmless young man leading a group of thugs to someone's house to seize assets. I read the report, my hands trembling. The entire family, from top to bottom, was a criminal gang disguised as legitimate business people. They had built their empire on the suffering and fear of others. My indignation reached a boiling point. I wasn't just seeking revenge for myself anymore. I had to drag this entire den of vipers into the light and bring justice to their victims. I instructed the PIS to dig deeper. I wanted a list of all the victims, evidence of the loan agreements, the records of their violent collection tactics. I wanted a complete criminal file on the Thompson family. While I was quietly building my arsenal, my husband's family seemed to have completely forgotten about me. They thought the problem was solved. The PI's report noted that after a brief period of playing the heartbroken husband, Ethan had returned to his late-night partying. He was openly seeing a beautiful young mistress, spending money lavishly. Perhaps he thought that without me there to watch him, he was free to do as he pleased. Eleanor, too, had dropped her somber facade. She was back to her socialite gatherings, showing off to her friends and planning overseas trips. They were enjoying life, a life built on my disappearance. I looked at the photos the investigators sent Ethan cozying up to his mistress in a fancy club, Eleanor trying on a designer handbag, and I felt no pain, only limitless contempt. Go on, enjoy yourselves, I thought, because your time is running out. My net was slowly being drawn. Every piece of evidence I gathered was another knot pulled tight. And soon, when that net finally dropped, none of you will have a way out. 2 months passed. 2 months of living in the shadows, of transforming myself into someone completely new. The injury on my ankle had healed, but the wound in my heart had not. It had turned into a cold source of energy, driving me every day. I now had almost everything I needed. A detailed dossier on the crimes of the Thompson Company, a list of victims from their loan sharking operation, and undeniable proof of Ethan's decadent and unfaithful lifestyle. On the legal side, Chloe had found a copy of the Thompson family genealogy in an old library, which mentioned the patriarch and the dragon seal, further cementing the authenticity of the charter. Everything was ready. It was time for me to make my move, to begin their nightmare. I chose not to go to the police immediately. That would be too easy for them. I wanted them to experience the feeling of confusion, of fear, of watching everything they had built crumble without understanding why. I wanted them to live in a hell on earth before they faced the judgment of the law. I decided to strike where it would hurt them the most, their money and their reputation. My first attack was aimed at the business partners of Thompson & Sons. Through my investigation, I knew that most of the company's major contracts came from a few of Eleanor's close associates, people who were likely aware of, or even participated in, the company's shady dealings. I couldn't act directly, but I could be subtle. Using a third party, I secretly bought up a defaulted loan from one of Thompson & Sons' largest partners. Then, I had an anonymous letter sent to the remaining partners, leaking information that the Thompson Company was in financial trouble, involved in illegal activities, and was on the verge of being investigated. The letter was cleverly written, a mix of truth and suggestive falsehoods, enough to plant seeds of doubt and fear in their minds. In the business world, no one wants to be associated with legal trouble. The domino effect began. Partners grew wary. They started demanding immediate payment on outstanding debts, refused to sign new contracts, and halted ongoing projects. The company's cash flow was suddenly squeezed dry. Eleanor and Ethan started to panic. I sat in my motel room, reading the daily reports from my PIS, my heart calm. The report stated that Eleanor was scrambling to secure high-interest hard money loans to stay afloat. Ethan was spending his days in bars, trying to salvage business relationships, but to no avail. Their financial world was collapsing, but that was just the beginning. My second attack was aimed squarely at the reputation Eleanor had spent a lifetime building her facade as a successful, benevolent businesswoman. I had my team gather information on the charity events she often hosted, where she always played the role of the generous benefactor. Then, I had anonymous evidence sent to several news outlets. It included falsified bank statements showing that charitable donations hadn't gone to their intended recipients, but had been funneled into murky personal accounts. A few smaller, sensationalist blogs and papers immediately ran with the story, raising questions about the transparency of Eleanor's philanthropic activities. Though they weren't major publications, the articles were enough to create a stir. Eleanor's image began to tarnish. Her wealthy friends and business partners started to distance themselves. The artificial high society world she was so proud of was turning its back on her. She became irritable and suspicious, constantly berating her employees and her own son. Their house was no longer filled with fake laughter, only arguments and blame. Meanwhile, I remained silent, watching everything unfold on my computer screen. I saw Ethan growing more and more despondent. He neglected his work, throwing himself into even more reckless partying. He openly moved his mistress into our home, the home I had spent so much effort building. She wore my jewelry, my dresses, and slept in my bed. My pee. Eyes sent me the photos. For the first time in months, I felt a sharp pang in my heart. Not of jealousy, but of sorrow for my home. It had been defiled by such vulgar people. "Do you want me to send someone to have a word with that girl?" Chloe asked over the phone, her voice laced with anger. "No, that's not necessary," I replied, my voice cold. "Let her enjoy it. The more she flaunts, the more it will hurt when she loses everything. Besides, her presence is the most vivid proof of Ethan's betrayal. I need that for the final act. I didn't just want them to lose their money and reputation. I wanted them to be utterly ruined, to pay for every tear and every ounce of pain they had caused me and their other victims. I knew my attacks had only shaken them, not defeated them. They still had one ace up their sleeve, their connections to the underworld, inherited from Benny Hogan. I knew sooner or later they would resort to violence. They would send people to find me, to talk, or worse, to eliminate me. But I was no longer afraid. I was prepared. I was not the weak grace of the past. They were about to face an opponent they could never have imagined. I had set a much larger trap, and I was just waiting for them to walk right into it. The war was shifting from a financial assault to a direct confrontation, and it was about to get much bloodier. The financial storm I had created left Thompson and Sons reeling. Eleanor and Ethan, like two cornered animals, began to tear each other apart. Arguments in their home became a daily occurrence. Eleanor berated her son for being a useless playboy, good for nothing but squandering their legacy. Ethan snapped back, blaming his mother's greed and illegal dealings for their current predicament. Amidst this crisis, the true face of the husband I once loved was revealed in all its pathetic, naked ugliness. Believing I had truly vanished from his life, Ethan no longer needed to play the role of a devoted husband. He completely let himself go, spiraling into a lifestyle of depravity and irresponsibility. The daily reports from my investigators read like a cheap novel about a fallen prince. He abandoned his duties at the company entirely, leaving Eleanor to single-handedly juggle the mountain of debt and canceled contracts. He spent most of his time with his new mistress, a young model named Tiffany Rose. He moved her into the home we had once shared. It was a blatant insult, a direct provocation, even if he thought I was no longer around to feel it. Tiffany, from what my investigators gathered, was a purely transactional woman, interested only in money. She quickly took my place, not just in Ethan's bed, but in the lavish life I had inadvertently helped build for him. The photos they sent made my stomach churn. Tiffany wearing the designer gown I'd bought on a business trip to Paris. Tiffany wearing the diamond necklace Ethan gave me for our 3rd anniversary. Tiffany posing for selfies in my sports car. She was feasting on my life like a vulture picking at a carcass. To please his new lover and project an image of wealth he no longer had, Ethan spent money like water. He took Tiffany on shopping sprees at luxury boutiques, to dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants, and on vacations to 5-star resorts. He had no idea that every dollar he spent was being meticulously recorded. He was using the supplementary credit cards I had set up for him years ago. He must have assumed that with me missing, no one was monitoring the accounts, but he was wrong. I hadn't canceled them. I had deliberately left them active as a trap, a tool to track his every move. Each time he swiped a card, a notification pinged on my secret phone. His spending in 1 month alone topped 6 figures, all while his mother's company was on the brink of bankruptcy. Ethan's shamelessness didn't stop there. He began selling off valuable items from the house. The Patek Philippe watch I gave him for his birthday, the wine collection we had built together, even the valuable paintings I had purchased to decorate our home. He sold them all to fund his lifestyle with his mistress. He was systematically destroying every memory, every trace of my existence in that house. He wanted to erase me completely. Reading the reports, looking at the photos, I no longer felt pain, only a profound, bottomless contempt. This was the man I had loved, for whom I had sacrificed my youth and my career. It was laughable. His debauchery did not escape Eleanor's notice. The fights between mother and son grew more violent. "Are you even human anymore?" I read from a transcript of a recording my PIS managed to plant in their living room. "The company is about to go under. Your mother is getting old and has to run around begging for money, and all you can do is waste it on that whore? Do you want this whole family to end up on the street?" "It's my money! I'll spend it how I want!" Ethan yelled back. "Stop trying to control me. All you've ever cared about is money and the company. Have you ever once cared about how I feel?" I suffocated for years with Grace, always pretending, always putting on an act. Now that she's gone, I can finally be myself. Don't you dare ruin it for me. Be yourself? You call this parasitic, family-destroying lifestyle being yourself? Eleanor shrieked. If you don't break up with that tramp and get back to work, you can stop calling me your mother. Fine. No mother, then. I'm sick of being your puppet anyway. Ethan slammed the table and stormed out, leaving Eleanor alone in the living room, sobbing uncontrollably. The crack in their family had become a chasm, impossible to repair. And I was the one standing at a distance, pouring gasoline on the fire. I had my team send photos of Ethan's extravagant lifestyle to the creditors of Thompson & Sons. When they saw the debtor's son throwing money around while his mother was begging for extensions, they were enraged. They started applying more pressure, threatening lawsuits and sending their own collectors. Eleanor was backed into a corner. The pressure from partners, from creditors, and from her own ungrateful son caused the once powerful, ruthless matriarch to begin to crumble. I knew it was time to launch my next strike. A psychological blow designed to turn the fracture in their family into a complete shatter. I would make them turn on each other, exposing the foulest sins they had hidden for so long. Ethan's party was about to end, and the price he would pay for his betrayal would be far more than just money. While the Thompson family was drowning in a chaotic mess of debt and internal strife, I decided it was time to drop another bomb into the eye of the storm. A carefully calculated psychological bomb designed to completely sever the fragile ties that remained between them. I knew Eleanor's greatest weakness wasn't money, but her pride and her fear of losing control. Ethan's weakness was his cowardice and his habit of blaming others. I would strike at both. My plan began with a letter. Not an anonymous one, but a letter from a prestigious international law firm, delivered by courier directly to Eleanor. The contents, drafted by Chloe, were a formal legal notice. It stated that Grace Miller, following her disappearance, had retained their firm to represent her in all legal matters. As a first step, they were demanding a full audit and explanation of all transactions related to the partners named in the Black Ledger. The letter never mentioned if I was alive or where I was. It was simply a cold, legal move, a ghost from the past returning to collect a debt. The arrival of this letter caused a seismic shock in the Thompson household. Eleanor, after reading it, suffered a hypertensive crisis and had to be hospitalized. She couldn't comprehend how I, someone she thought was gone forever, could strike back so professionally from overseas. The fear that her darkest secrets were about to be exposed caused her to have a complete breakdown. But my main target wasn't Eleanor. It was Ethan. Shortly after his mother was hospitalized, I had another letter sent, this time directly to him. This one wasn't legal. It was handwritten in a feminine script and spritzed with a light perfume. Inside was a single short sentence. Do you want to know who helped Grace get out of the country and who's behind all of this? Meet me at the old spot. Below was the address of a discreet garden cafe where I knew Ethan and his mistress, Tiffany, often met. The letter was signed only with a mysterious T. Ethan, paranoid and desperate, would never ignore such a letter. He would assume Tiffany was betraying him, conspiring with me to take him down. As I predicted, my PIS reported that he stormed into the cafe that afternoon, not for a date, but to confront Tiffany, who happened to be there completely by chance. A fiery argument erupted in public. Ethan accused her of being a double agent. Tiffany, bewildered and then furious, cursed him for being a pathologically jealous maniac. Their relationship, built on money and lust, shattered instantly. Tiffany packed her bags and left Ethan's house that day, taking a few valuable items with her on the way out. Ethan had lost both his lover and, more importantly, his last shred of composure. He became paranoid, suspecting everyone around him. He believed some invisible force was setting a trap for him, and in his desperation, he did the stupidest thing possible. He went to his underworld contacts, the thugs from his debt collection crew, and asked them to find the bastard who was backing me. He had personally dragged the criminal element into the game. This was exactly what I had been waiting for. The moment I learned Ethan had put a hit out, I put my own people into action. I didn't need to do much, just accidentally leak some misinformation. I had rumors spread that the person helping me was a rival mob boss, an old enemy of Benny Hogan's crew. A gangland drama was set in motion. The two criminal factions began eyeing each other with suspicion. A few minor scuffles broke out. The security situation in the area where Thompson & Sons operated became tense. The police started paying attention. They launched an investigation into the protection rackets and loan sharking activities in the area. And of course, the first name on their list of suspects was Thompson & Sons, the company at the center of the instability. My trap had sprung perfectly. Ethan, in his attempt to find a phantom enemy, had led the police right to his own front door. He had personally lit the match that would burn down his family's last escape route. Eleanor, after being released from the hospital, heard that her company was under police investigation and completely collapsed. She knew it was over. The fracture in the Thompson dynasty was no longer a crack. It was a bottomless abyss. Suspicion, blame, and fear had destroyed them from within. They were no longer a criminal alliance, just a terrified mob of individuals trying to save themselves. I sat in my safe house, monitoring the developments through the reports. I felt no satisfaction, only a deep, empty exhaustion. I never wanted things to go this far, but they had left me no other choice. They had sown the wind, and now they were reaping a whirlwind far more destructive than they could ever have imagined. It was time for me to appear, not for revenge anymore, but to end it, to put a final, definitive stop to this tragedy. The storm I had quietly orchestrated had swept through the Thompson family, leaving nothing but wreckage in its wake. The company was sealed for investigation, their bank accounts frozen. The family members were consumed by fear and mutual suspicion. They no longer had the time or energy to think about me. They were too busy trying to escape the tightening grip of the law. I knew it was time for me to make my appearance. The final stage was set, and I needed a truly special occasion to bring the curtain down on this drama in the most spectacular way possible. That opportunity arrived. It was the 10th anniversary of my father-in-law's death. Every year, Eleanor had made a grand affair of this day. Not because she missed her husband, but because it was an occasion to display her power, to gather the extended family, and to flaunt the wealth and tradition of the Thompson clan. But this year, everything was different. With her finances in ruins and her reputation destroyed, she could no longer afford a lavish ceremony. The memorial was held quietly at the old family mausoleum on their estate, a solemn place on the outskirts of the city. The only guests were the closest members of the family. It was the perfect stage, a somber venue, filled with every person who needed to know the truth. I was no longer the Grace of 3 months ago. I had prepared meticulously for this return. I chose a simple but elegant black silk dress that conveyed power and authority. My short hair was styled perfectly. My makeup was subtle but emphasized my eyes that no longer held fear, only calm resolve. I did not go alone. With me were Chloe and 2 other lawyers from her firm. We arrived neither early nor late, but at the precise moment the ceremony began, just as Eleanor, in her role as matriarch, stood before the family crypt to begin her speech about legacy, tradition, and honor. Our arrival plunged the entire gathering into a dead silence. All eyes turned to me. There were gasps of shock, looks of fear, and glares of outrage. Eleanor, who was holding a white rose, began to tremble. She turned and stared at me as if she had seen a ghost. "You! What are you doing here?" she stammered, her voice stripped of all its former authority. Ethan, standing beside her, turned deathly pale. He took a step back, as if afraid I would physically attack him. I said nothing. I walked calmly forward and placed a single white lily on the marble tomb. I bowed my head for a moment, a sign of respect for the deceased and a silent announcement of my return. Then I turned to face everyone. "Grace Miller, eldest daughter-in-law of the Thompson family, has returned," I announced, my voice clear and strong, echoing in the quiet space. "I have not returned to disrupt this solemn day. I have returned to do what should have been done long ago, to cleanse the stain that certain members of this family have smeared upon the honor of the Thompson name." My gaze swept from Eleanor to Ethan to the other uncles and aunts. Today, before the memory of our ancestors, I want to reveal the truth. The truth about my perfect mother-in-law and my perfect husband. Chloe stepped forward, opened her briefcase, and took out a thick file. "To the members of the Thompson family," she began, "I am the legal counsel for Mrs. Grace Miller. We are here today to present irrefutable evidence of serious criminal acts committed by Mrs. Eleanor Thompson and Mr. Ethan Thompson." She began her presentation, her voice crisp and professional. One by one, the pieces of evidence were revealed. An enlarged image of the Black Ledger was projected onto a portable screen. Bank statements, contracts with shell corporations, audio recordings of Ethan's drunken confessions, photos of his decadent lifestyle, and finally, the video of his younger brother leading a gang of thugs on a collection. A wave of murmurs and gasps swept through the family members. Those who had once respected Eleanor now looked at her with contempt. "No, it's not true. It's all lies," Eleanor shrieked, trying to rally. That monster is slandering me." But no one believed her. The evidence was too overwhelming. Just then, the gates of the mausoleum grounds swung open again. This time, it wasn't lawyers, but police detectives. They walked in, their faces grim, and headed straight for Eleanor and Ethan. "Eleanor Thompson and Ethan Thompson, you are under arrest for investigation into money laundering, loan sharking, and racketeering. You have the right to remain silent." Eleanor collapsed to the ground. Ethan stood frozen, as if turned to stone, offering no resistance. The cold steel of handcuffs clicked shut on their wrists, right there in front of the family tomb, in front of everyone. The drama had ended in the most humiliating way possible. I stood there, watching the chaos, feeling no triumph, only a deep, hollow exhaustion. It was over. I had won, but it was a victory that tasted of ash. I turned and walked away, leaving behind a broken family and a criminal empire in ruins. I didn't belong here anymore. I needed to find a peaceful place of my own. The memorial service ended in chaos and shame. The image of Eleanor and Ethan being led away in handcuffs became an indelible stain on the history of the Thompson family. As the police took them away, my legal team and I quietly departed. I had no desire to witness their final collapse. It was enough. Sitting in the car, enveloped by silence, I felt no elation, only a strange emptiness. The revenge was complete, but the future stretched before me as a vast, uncertain landscape. I had won, but I had also lost a family, however false it may have been. But I knew it wasn't truly over. Thompson and Sons, their criminal legacy, still existed, a rudderless ship tossed on a stormy sea. If I did nothing, it would sink, taking the jobs of hundreds of innocent employees with it. More importantly, the ancestors' charter that had granted me power also came with a profound responsibility to rebuild the family's legacy on a foundation of integrity. After many sleepless nights, I made a bold decision. I would not let Thompson & Sons go bankrupt. I would take it over. It wasn't about the money, it was about responsibility. I wanted to transform it from an instrument of crime into a force for good. The takeover was a monumental challenge. The company was a tangled mess of debt, illegal contracts, and a corporate culture accustomed to cutting corners. But I wasn't alone. With Chloe's legal expertise, my team of investigators, and the capital from the hidden treasure, I began the process of resurrection. My first act was to hold an all-hands meeting. Standing before hundreds of anxious employees, I didn't make grand speeches. I simply told them my story. I spoke of the company's past mistakes and of my vision for a new future, a future built on decency and integrity. My sincerity resonated with them. 6 months later, Thompson & Sons was completely transformed. I severed all illicit ties, made the company's finances completely transparent, and rebuilt the corporate culture around respect and honesty. It was no longer a name associated with the mob and money laundering. It had become a symbol of rebirth. I was no longer Grace Miller, the discarded wife. To my employees and business partners, I was Chairwoman Miller, a woman who had rebuilt her kingdom from the ashes. I had truly returned, not as an avenger, but as a creator, the queen of my own life. A year after I officially took over Thompson & Sons, my life had entered a new chapter. The company was thriving, its reputation growing stronger each day. I had proven that a business could succeed without resorting to dirty tricks. As for the Thompsons, they received the sentences they deserved. Eleanor and Ethan were both sentenced to long prison terms. Their empire, built on crime, had crumbled. Occasionally, I would hear news of them, and I felt no hatred, only a vague sense of pity. Their greed had destroyed them, and that was the most profound lesson of all. I sold the house filled with painful memories and built a small, modern home in the suburbs with a garden full of white roses. I learned to love and value myself, to know that I deserved peace and happiness. Chloe remained my closest confidant, the friend who walked with me through the darkest days and shared the simplest joys. One afternoon, she asked if I'd thought about starting a new relationship. I just smiled. I've already found the greatest love of my life, myself. It's a love that will never betray me. Life is full of surprises. On a charity trip, I ran into my first love from college. He was now a teacher in a rural community, dedicating his life to underprivileged children. Our meeting didn't blossom into a romance, but it filled me with a warmth, reminding me that good people and genuine kindness still existed in the world. I decided to use a portion of the company's profits to establish a scholarship fund in the name of the Thompson Patriarch, helping talented but disadvantaged law students. I wanted his legacy to be used in the most meaningful way possible. One morning, I stood before the old, dry well on the grounds of the family estate, which I had since had restored and turned into a public garden. I looked down into its depths, a place that was once my hell, but also the place that gave me a new life. I felt no fear, only a deep gratitude to the ancestor, and gratitude for the trials I had endured, for they had forged the person I am today. The sun was rising, its first rays illuminating the garden, chasing away the last shadows of the night. My life, too, had turned a new page, one that was brilliant and full of light. My life, since the day I was pushed down that well, had come full circle. From the depths of despair, I found an ancestor's will. From a spurned wife, I became the master of a dynasty. And from a victim drowning in sorrow, I rose to become the deliverer of justice. The war was over. The wicked had paid their price, the injustices exposed. Now, standing at the height of my career and looking back at the path I traveled, I no longer see the scars of hatred, only invaluable lessons. I have learned that forgiveness is not about forgetting, but about freeing one's own soul. I no longer resent Eleanor or Ethan because through their cruel actions, they inadvertently gave me the chance to become a stronger, better version of myself. They pushed me into a well, but in doing so, they helped me find a treasure. The legacy the patriarch left behind was not just gold or power, but a lesson in character and wisdom. I have used that legacy not to enrich myself, but to resurrect a business, to create jobs for hundreds, and to ignite hope for future generations of lawyers through the scholarship fund. I found peace, not in revenge, but in purpose. Every day, I live a meaningful life, doing work I believe in. I no longer search for a shoulder to lean on, because I have learned to become a mountain myself. The past is closed, but it will forever be a part of me, a reminder of the power of the human will and the enduring belief in what is right. A new dawn has truly broken, not just over the land of my ancestors, but within my own soul, a soul cleansed and reborn from the darkness.